guys. So we've already started working with trigonometric ratios, right? I got you guys comfortable with being able to see what they are and how they look like and how we can actually set them up. But what we're going to be working with today is we're going to be working with seeing how we can actually use them to determine unknown sides, right? Because that's the whole point of using them. It's being able to figure out unknown sides, unknown angles. Unknown angles we're going to work with in the next lesson, but today we're going to work with unknown sides, right? We're going to work with actually being able to apply trigonometric ratios, right? Being able to see how we use them. And so the first thing, again, just feeling comfortable with knowing what they are. We know that it's sine, cosine, tangent, right? Know the formulas that we had, the ones that I've given in class over and over again. Just know that sine, the formula for sine, just quickly, sine is going to be opposite over hypotenuse, right? The formula for cosine is adjacent over hypotenuse. And we know that the formula for tangent is opposite over adjacent, right? So we have those, and what we're going to do today is we're going to be able to use these in order to be able to figure out and set up for determining unknown side measures, right? So always remember, opposite is always what's across from the angle that we're working with. The adjacent is always what side is next to the angle that we're working with. And the hypotenuse is always the longest side of any triangle we're working with, right? Always. So the way that we're going to see this, and it's probably just best to give it to you guys just so you see it and start feeling comfortable with how it looks. I'm not going to solve it yet because I do want to get you guys comfortable with just being able to see it and set it up, right? So we have a right triangle, which has to be a right triangle. Let's make this here, let's make this 47 degrees, right? Let's say that's 47 degrees. I want to make this side here, I want to make this side A, and let's make this side here 5 centimeters, right? Let's say that my goal for this would be to actually solve for A. I wanted to figure out how long A is going to be. In order for us to do that, we're going to be able to use sine, cosine, or tangent because we have another side and we have an angle, right? And the same thing I told you guys with getting comfortable, put an angle mark there just so you're actually focusing on it, right? Just so we're actually seeing what we're working with. We know we're working with angle 47, right? We put a mark there just to focus on that. And now let's label everything we have, right? We know that this side here, we know that this is the opposite side, right? Because it's across from the angle. We know that this side here is our adjacent side because it's right next to the angle. We know that this here would be the hypotenuse, that would be the longest side, but we don't put anything there because they're not giving us that. Since they're not giving us this side, we can't use it because how can we use a side where there's nothing given for it, right? So the only bits of information we have is we have the opposite side, which is A, and we have the adjacent side, which is 5. So start thinking. We have opposite, we have adjacent. Which one uses opposite and adjacent? And that's the way you gotta think of it. The only one that uses opposite and adjacent would be tangent, right? So we have to use tangent because the formula for tangent is opposite over adjacent. We can't use sine, we can't use cosine because sine and cosine need the hypotenuse. Since we don't have the hypotenuse, we can't use sine or cosine, right? We can only go by which one has the parts we need. And always remember, whenever we set these up, what always goes next to sine, cosine, and tangent is always the angle. Always has to be. So in this case, the angle we're working with is 47. So we write 47 degrees. And again, the angle will always go next to whatever we're working with. Whether it's sine, cosine, or tangent, the angle always goes next to it. And now, we just set it up the way we always would. If the formula is opposite over adjacent for tangent, we would do opposite first over adjacent last. Okay? That's all it is. Because tangent is literally opposite over adjacent. And always remember, the angle always goes next to the trig function that we're working with, always. Again, I wanted to show you guys this. In a second, we're going to solve it, but I want you guys to start getting comfortable with being able to use it. But again, you always have to analyze the information to know whether it's going to be sine, cosine, or tangent. They won't tell you that. You need to figure that out yourselves, okay? We need to analyze the information that's given. So now, let's actually try one. Again, we're going to set it up, but then we're actually going to see how we solve it, right? So we have this situation, and again, it always has to be a right triangle. Always has to be a right triangle. And in this case, I'm going to give the angle measure of 22 degrees. I'm going to make this x, and I'm going to make this one here 19 feet, right? So what we're going to solve for, just confirming, guys, I apologize. So what we're solving for x, right? But same situation as before. We actually want to be able to analyze this to see how we're going to set it up, right? We know the only angle we're working with is 22, because again, going back to previous lessons, we can never work with the right angle, ever. So we're going to work with the 22 right there. And just like we did before, let's analyze the information we have, right? We know that this here, the 19, we know that's our hypotenuse. And we know that's our hypotenuse, again, longest side, always across from the right angle, right? So that's our hypotenuse. And we know that x is going to be adjacent. And we know it's adjacent because, again, it's next to the angle, right? This would be opposite, but since we don't have that, we don't put anything there, right? So looking at what we have adjacent, we have hypotenuse. The only trig ratio that uses adjacent and hypotenuse is going to be cosine. And again, it has to be cosine because the formula for cosine is adjacent over hypotenuse. We can't use sine, we can't use tangent because there's no opposite, right? So setting it up, it's going to be cosine. Remember, always angle goes next to it. Cosine of 22 degrees equals, now the formula for cosine is adjacent over hypotenuse. So it's going to be x over 19, right? And again, I wrote it that way because x is adjacent, 19 is hypotenuse. That's our formula for cosine, right? So now the way that we have it, right? We set it up. Now it's how do we solve this? And again, in class, I'm going to show you guys. But on your phones or on your calculators, guys, you have an option that has sine, cosine, and tangent. We've never used those buttons, but again, you may not have used those buttons ever, but they're there for this exact reason. Because in order for us to be able to solve for x, we need to calculate what cosine of 22 degrees is. And so the way we do that is we're literally going to press the button that says cosine and do 22 degrees. And once you type in cosine of 22 degrees, it will give you the number of 0.93, right? We're estimating it. It's going to give us 0.93. So where I got cosine of 0.93 was I literally inputted cosine of 22 and it gave us 0.93. That's where that came from, right? And now the rest, we just write it as is for now, right? Because we're going to end up solving it. X over 19. So again, the only thing that we did was cosine of 22 gave us 0.93 on the calculator, which again, in class I will show you guys. And if you have issues with it, feel free to ask me, okay? Now, our goal is to solve for x. The easiest way that we can do this is by turning this into a proportion, right? That's a fraction. This isn't a fraction, so the easiest way to turn it into a fraction, put it over 1, right? Because now that we have that, again, all I did was just put this over 1 to make it a proportion, to make it a fraction, right? Because once you have a proportion, just cross multiply, right? We're going to do 1 times x, which is just x. And then when we do 0.93 times 19, it's going to end up giving us 17.67 feet. And there's our answer, guys. That's all it is. So again, we set it up based on the information we had. First thing you got to do, cosine of 22, which gave us 0.93. And then in order to solve for x, again, put it over 1 to make it a proportion, which are easy to solve. Then cross multiply. 1 times x was x. 0.93 times 19 was 17.67. And there's our answer. We know that x is going to be 17.67 feet. Right? Let's try another one just to get you comfortable. But again, the hardest part isn't solving it, guys. The hardest part is just being able to set it up properly, okay? And if it takes practice, it takes practice. But I am here to help you guys out. So let's do one more, right? We have a triangle. Okay. and this is going to end up being 34 degrees. This is going to end up being h. Can't forget that it's a right triangle, and this only applies for right triangles. And this one here is going to be 23 inches. Okay? Again, just get in the habit of it. We know that the only angle we're working with is angle 34. Right? Working with angle 34. So now let's analyze it. We know that 23 is our hypotenuse. We know that h is our opposite because, again, it's across from angle 34 degrees. So we have opposite, we have hypotenuse. The only one that uses opposite and hypotenuse is sine. And again, sine, because the formula for sine is opposite over hypotenuse. We can't use cosine and we can't use tangent because cosine and tangent need an adjacent side. Since we don't have the adjacent side, all we can use is sine. I apologize. We can only use sine. And now let's set it up as we always do. It's going to be sine of 34 degrees equals, and now the formula for sine is opposite over hypotenuse, so it's going to be opposite h over hypotenuse 23. Okay. Again, just set it up. Sine of 34 degrees equals opposite over hypotenuse. Because now again, it's just our process of solving it. Once you have this, first thing we have to do, sine of 34. Sine of 34 is going to give us 0.56. Right? Again, all I did was just sine of 34 to end up giving us 0.56, right? Just estimated it. And then we bring down the rest, right? Equals h over 23. And now in order to solve this, again, turn this into a proportion, right? That's a fraction. To turn 0.56 into a fraction, put it over 1. And now the way we solve a proportion, cross multiply. We know that 1 times h is h. We know that 0.56 times 23 is going to end up giving us 12.88. So our answer is going to be 12.88 inches. And that's it, guys. Again, just getting comfortable with being able to set it up. Because once you set it up, it's easy to solve, guys, by turning it into a proportion, cross multiplying. But always remember, in order to figure out which one you're going to use, sine, cosine, or tangent, be sure to analyze the information based on the angle that we're given, okay? If you guys have any questions, feel free to ask. Take care.